I was coming in the door and somebody asked me if I was James Patterson, and I thought about it for a second. And then they said, why, does he owe you money? I guess this puts new spin on coming to the principal's office, except that you're at my office today. And I came here to, and I think this also is just another way of looking at things, to help you save lives, and to, as Carmen said, to turn everybody here into even more of a reading missionary. Not listeners. I mean, we're going to listen here, okay, and I'm going to chit-chat, but doers. And that's a hard thing in life because somehow we think if we listen, it's enough. It's nothing. And I sort of dedicate, and my wife Sue, and we dedicate what we do to doing, making sure that we're doing things. So, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And as principals, you're in a position to do really terrific things. You're definitely in a position to save lives. And sometimes you don't realize that. I have a friend who, he taught special classes in BOCES up in Westchester for 30 years or so. And I met a young guy who had been in his class, and I mentioned this guy to him. He said, oh, that kid, he was just impossible. But from this kid's point of view, he said, Mr. Mahoney saved my life. And sometimes you never hear that story because these kids grow up and they get a little older. But you have to believe that that's what you're going to do. And in terms of reading, better reading produces better thinkers because they're exposed to more things. Ultimately, better citizens, better spouses, which is really important, and we see that, thank God in a weird way for the NFL. And it's not an NFL issue, it's an American issue. But better spouses come from better mothers and fathers come from more reading. And, on the one piece, they're kids who are bright, and the more the bigger breadth that they have, the better thinkers they become. But even more important are kids who are at risk, and if they don't become competent readers, I'm not even interested in them becoming readers for life, just that they become competent readers. Because if they aren't competent, how are they going to get through high school? Seriously, I mean, reading is the foundation of everything. I mean, we know that kind of, but we don't live it. We don't live it. If you cannot read competently, you can't do science, you can't do history, you can't do English. You probably aren't going to be able to get a job, or at least it's going to be hard for you. Your chances in later life are not great. And we've all noticed this, I mean, on personal levels, that the world is getting tougher. And it seems to me the world is getting meaner. And neither of those things are great. And now, of course, you all kind of know that. We all kind of know that, but we don't act on it as much as we should. Here are a few things that you don't know. My mother was a teacher for 45 years. Newburgh, New York, tough town, tough schools, tough place to grow up, still is. I was a high school valedictorian, got 780 on my SATs in reading. Had a fellowship at Vanderbilt, graduate fellowship, but I was a reluctant reader. I did read about 1 million comic books as a kid. That's really kind of how I learned to read, and that's okay up to a point. Then when I was around 19, I started working my way through college at a mental hospital just outside of Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I worked a lot of times I worked the 11 to 7 shift, and most nights there wasn't a lot to do, thank God. The nights when there was a lot to do, it was a little hairy. But on the other nights, I started reading like a mad person, and I read John Barrowman and John Dos Passos and John Cheever and John Fowles and John Steinbeck and John Irving and John Barth and John Recchi and John... Can't read my own handwriting. And that's just some of the Johns. And I read Gunter Grass. I don't know any other Gunters, writers. But the important thing was suddenly I was reading what I wanted to read. Now, it was heavy stuff, but that's what I wanted to read. I wanted to read difficult plays, and I wanted to read poetry, and I wanted to read difficult writers. And that's how I fell in love with reading. Because up to that point, I wasn't a big reader. I was a decent reader. I was a good reader. But somehow in grade school and high school, it just didn't turn on for me. And you know, in those days, a typical English class, you'd come in, read the first 40 pages of King Lear. You'll be tested tomorrow. Read Middlemarch. Read Lady Chatterley's Lover. No, they never asked us to read that. That one I would have wanted to read. And the result was, and obviously we have to go through this now with Common Core and other things that help in some ways and get in the way in others. I didn't get turned on to reading. I didn't get turned on to writing. Let me go back to Shakespeare for just a second, the King Lear thing. Once again, when I'm growing up, you know, we're having to read Hamlet, we're having to read King Lear and whatever, but we're not turned on to it. And I gave a class in high school, and what I did was I had everybody stand up on their seats, and I said, we're going to read a little bit from Hamlet, but I want you to understand what the situation is in England. Now, first of all, in London at this period, everybody was going to the theater, which is really weird. Now, that was not happening anywhere else in the world, but for some reason, theater had really caught on in London. There were all of these theaters, most of which would burn down every year because they were made out of wood, but there were all these theaters, and more than half the population was going to the theater on a weekly basis. But these theaters were nuts. I mean, they were loud, they were noisy, and there was a lot of drinking and other stuff going on. So the actors had to get the attention of the people. So I said, that's why I have you up on your seats, standing up on your seats. And now I want you to read at the top of your voice because you got to get attention. Now, you principals don't like that because you'd be down, shutting me down after about 5 minutes of these kids screaming Hamlet at the top of their voices. But they were beginning to get it a little bit, a little frame of reference. And then I said, look, I got to talk history for like 2 minutes here, not too much, but just enough so that you understand kind of what the scenario was, because Shakespeare wrote about history a lot. And the other thing is, you'll notice that I've covered the walls with all of these phrases and words and whatever. And I said, Shakespeare made up all this shit. I didn't say that. He all these phrases, all these words, road. He made up. He made it up. Yeah, he just made it up. He made up the word road. He made all these other words. You know. Now suddenly, these kids are a little interested, as opposed to, here's King Lear, read 40 pages, you'll be tested. No, that doesn't make it. Or the kind of Shakespeare is really important and you must love him. Well, says who? Seriously. I mean, you know, you got to make me. I got to feel that. I got to come to that conclusion. You can help me. Soon I have a 16-year-old, Jack. When Jack was 5, he wrote his first novel, illustrated, Death of the Butterfly Catcher. Butterfly catcher gets on a plane, travels halfway around the world, doesn't catch the butterfly. He gets on a boat, travels, doesn't catch the butterfly. Gets on a train. Jack loves trains. Catches the butterfly. Train stops. He gets off the train. Another train, butterfly catcher catches the butterfly. Gets off the train, isn't looking, gets hit by a train going the other way. Death of the butterfly catcher. Butterfly flies away. Excellent. Beginning, middle, great end. The kid has it all. But Jack was not a big reader when he was younger. And the summer when he was 8, Sue and I decreed that Jack had to read every day. And cruel, I know, inhuman, old school. Jack didn't have to mow the lawn, but he had to read every day, 40 minutes, whatever, longer than that if he wanted. But the key was that Sue and I went out and helped Jack find books that we knew he would like, or we felt there was a good chance he would like them. And to some extent, and obviously it's not going to work with everybody, but that's what parents need to do. It's what grandparents need to do. It's what aunts and uncles need to do. I mean, in my house, my grandmother was the key for me. And it's somewhat important that they get some of this at the school. People say, you got to do this, because, and this is a big thing for